forever chemicals, contamination, and what's happening to protect you. Hello, I'm Richard Pyatt, and this is Legally Speaking. Those forever chemicals are also known as PFAS, the substance that makes Teflon non-stick, makes fire-retardant chemical foam resist fires, degreasing and stain-resistant treatments for clothing, and more. Contamination in the human body is permanent, and that's where the Utah Attorney General's office comes in as we team up with other states and the federal government to seek legal remedies to this contamination. Craig Anderson is the AG's division chief in the Environment and Health Divisions and joins us now with an update. Thanks for joining us today, Craig.
You bet.
So PFAS are a group of man-made chemicals that includes, I'll let you say this.
Polyfluoroalkyl substances.
Okay. And also known as Gen X and other chemicals.
Correct.
Now, the compounds are biologically and environmentally persistent. For this reason, and for that reason, are referred to as forever chemicals. The chemicals have been manufactured primarily by companies like 3M, DuPont, Tyco Fire Products, ChemGuard, and others since the 1940s, and are used in a variety of products and industries, a lot of stuff that we use every day, due to those unique characteristics. So I guess the question, Craig, is there a legal case pending when it comes to forever chemicals, the effect that they have on people, and what's the difference between, why don't we start with that? Is there a legal case pending?
There is. There are actually a series of cases that started in about 2014 based upon a number of individuals who were experiencing problems. The first case was in West Virginia. It was associated with a farmer who was located downstream from a DuPont landfill. And he noticed that there was water flowing out of this landfill into a creek on his land that was foaming up. He noticed that his cattle were having problems health-wise. Then he also noticed that later on family members were experiencing problems. So he tried to find someone to help him to sample the water to see if there was any connection between what he was observing coming out of this landfill going into the creek on his land. And he didn't have a lot of success generating interest because DuPont was a local employer, very high profile, contributed financially to the community, and so nobody was interested really in taking DuPont on. But later on, as things developed, there was an attorney who got interested in this case. He was primarily a defense attorney, but he became interested in this farmer's problems and what he was experiencing. So he started to look into this in about 1998. And the first case against DuPont, based upon a number of testing and retaining experts and looking into things and trying to compile some documents, was filed in about 2014. So based upon the first case that was filed and a judgment that was subsequently entered against DuPont, there were a number of other individual tort cases filed against DuPont, resulting in individual judgments. And then subsequently, DuPont continued to, notwithstanding the fact they were experiencing adverse judgments, continued to appeal those cases. And then ultimately there was a class action that was filed later on and a large, very large judgment that was entered in 2018. And DuPont decided to settle that particular class action. But since then, there have been more cases that have been filed based upon developing science. During that period of time, there were experts in individual cases who were looking at the problems with forever chemicals, and they ultimately developed it's called a C8 science task force that started to develop a complete body of evidence. And then there were documents discovered in the DuPont litigation showing that DuPont and others were aware that there were problems with these products as early as the 1960s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So what happened to the farmer? Did his family get any kind of cancers or anything as a result of what they were sensing that they had been exposed to?
There were a number of health consequences that were associated with that farmer's family, and they ultimately were one of the parties that did get a judgment against DuPont for the conditions that they experienced. I'm not totally familiar with that whole.
But there have
background.
been documented health consequences for other people
Yes,
elsewhere as well. So I mean,
absolutely.
theirs was the first that we know about, but the consequences have been going
Yeah,
on.
it's referred to as the bellwether case, the first.
Okay, it was just the one that happened to be the one that we know about.
Yeah, exactly.
So the contamination can show up in a number of different ways, but significant water contamination is a real problem in some states. Is that kind of a concern here in Utah, water contamination from PFAS?
It's the major pathway for exposures for individuals is through drinking water, and typically what happens, there are some areas where there are manufacturing facilities where the chemicals are used in producing various products. In Utah, the primary route of exposure is through firefighting foams. These aqueous materials are really stable at high temperatures. So petroleum fires like with aircraft or automobiles, or a refinery that catches on fire, or a forest fire. The pink material that you see planes dropping on forest fires is based on PFAS. Yeah.
Okay, so that stuff seems like it's doing a lot of good, but it's actually kind of contaminating our wilderness areas or our wild areas.
Yeah, so what happens is when this material is picked up through stormwater or surface water drainage, it goes into the storm drains and then is not filtered out in the water treatment system, so it can end up in drinking water.
So what about the exposure from Teflon pans, the consumer end of it? We've all used Teflon.
Yeah.
You mentioned that it's the stuff that makes microwave popcorn not stick to the interior. I mean, it's in a lot of different things. It's the stuff that makes your clothing and your carpet and your sofa stain resistant. I mean,
right.
We're sitting it's rubbing against our skin. We're eating it.
Yeah, exactly.
every day. So is there any kind of documentation of exposure that way causing significant issues, or is it just sort of lurking in our bodies and we don't really know what's going to happen?
Primarily, it's from, in terms of exposure through ingestion. You hit the major one, it's the Teflon-coated products where the material can come off the surface, the coated surface, into food that you're preparing, or like with the microwave popcorn, the popcorn bags themselves are coated with the material, again, high temperature material, and it can come off the coating in the bag into the popcorn and you can ingest it. All of these things are known and understood, and right now, due to the fact that the public is becoming more and more aware of the problem, and manufacturers are aware of the regulatory requirements that are now just coming into place, are looking at other substitutes and getting away from the PFAS Gen X chemicals.
Okay. So if there was any kind of legal action that Utah was going to take part in, it seems like it would be a good idea for us to team up with other states, as we do in so many other issues, or even with the federal government. Do you think that seems like a necessary step? Is that something that we've already looked into, or where are we with?
There are a number of states that have done that. States have taken action and have been There have been a number of states, particularly in the East Coast, that have filed actions against DuPont and others, and those cases are consolidated in a multi-district litigation that's pending. One of the major changes that has occurred since the last time you and I talked about this is that in April this year, EPA adopted some drinking water standards specifically for PFAS chemicals. And it set a maximum contaminant level for drinking water. So this regulatory standard will now have to be met by all public drinking water systems. In addition to that, the major change for our interest, the state's interest, is that EPA also classified PFAS, forever chemicals, as a hazardous substance under the federal Superfund law. And so this is a big deal.
Right, that is a big deal.
Because rather than, having to go through a regular, tort lawsuit where you have to prove something in terms of the fact that a chemical is hazardous, it's now classified as hazardous under federal law. So that whole proof thing kind of goes away.
Right.
So
yeah.
What could happen is if there was a particular site that was designated as a source of contamination, it could now be listed on the national priorities list under the Superfund, and then that brings all of the federal regulatory powers to bear.
Okay. So are PFAS banned in the United States now? Can you still use them anywhere?
They're not specifically banned. There are some states where there are bans and some very, very restrictive regulations, but that predated the April 2024 listing by EPA. So although there isn't a specific ban in place, these regulatory standards now make it, extremely unattractive for companies to continue using the materials.
Well, I've noticed that they're still selling Teflon pans, and I don't know if the chemical foam is still being used to put out fires, and I don't know what kind of material. I know that microwave popcorn sales seem to be booming.
Still out there.
They're still popping.
Yeah.
So that stuff's still out there.
It's still out there, yeah. And it's not just microwave popcorn bags and Teflon. You mentioned the Scotch Guard that, is manufactured by 3M. That has the forever chemicals in it. The carpets that are treated with anti-stain materials, they're still using it. So it's still out there, but more and more companies are starting to get away from it.
So it seems like maybe the FDA, the number of federal agencies are taking steps to limit exposure. But is there more research on the health effects? Has there been more harm detected in a number of different ways? What are those?
So they have found that there are health impacts that are directly related to PFAS exposure. It's not a direct cause and effect relationship, but there is an association of increased risk. And, it ranges from cancers, specifically kidney cancers, testicular cancers. I think there's even one study that associates it with increased potential for breast cancer. It also can affect the immune system, reducing the body's ability to fight infections. There's an association with elevated cholesterol levels. And then also it's an endocrine disruptor, which can affect reproductive systems and can also affect development in children, and also some liver damage that can be associated with higher fatty tissue around the liver.
Okay. So from the company standpoint, if I were DuPont and 3M, I think one of the first lines of defense that I would try to use is that I created this product. It's been of great use to a number of cooks, to a number of fires that have been put out, a number of disasters that have been averted, a lot of spills that have been minimized because of our anti-stain, qualities. We didn't know about these harmful properties that were associated with them. Can they use that as a defense?
They can try and use it as a defense, but as I mentioned earlier, as a result of the litigation that's been ongoing during the discovery process, documents have been produced by the companies that show, again, that they were aware of the potential health risks in the 1960s. So the fact that there is documentation out there showing that they were aware of it limits the ability or the effectiveness of saying we didn't know and the benefits outweigh the risks. And then now as things go on, they have a duty to be, based upon this information and the cases that have developed, to be more aware of looking at their products, making more due diligence to determine risks associated with those products and to limit those risks. And now that we have a regulatory standard that's been adopted by the EPA just this April, then that ratchets the requirements much higher for them to be, more concerned.
Okay. So like the chemicals themselves, this case isn't going away.
It's not going away. No, it's not going away. And, again, from my perspective, the EPA's listing of PFAS and the forever chemicals, Gen X chemicals, as a hazardous substance will be the real game changer, because things like listing facilities as a national priority on the national priority list as a Superfund site gives the government tremendous leverage to be able to control those impacts. It creates a private right of action against anybody that would be identified as a potentially responsible party. And from the state's perspective, the real advantage for the state is the state can claim natural resource damages under the Superfund. So water, which is a state resource, can be potentially used as a basis for a natural resource damages claim.
Okay. All right. So are there acceptable alternatives for the things that PFAS was invented to handle?
There are.
A non-stick pan, for example, fire retardant, stain resistant, putting out fires. What are the alternatives let's give the listener a little bit of hope that there is some ways to solve these problems without the contamination angle.
Well, you mentioned Teflon pans, and as a result of the studies that have come out, there are new products that are available in the market, specifically ceramic coated pans that also have nonstick properties, but it's from a ceramic coating, not a forever chemical coating like Teflon. Cast iron is also an alternative. Seasoned, properly treated cast iron has nonstick properties, and then even stainless steel has nonstick properties, but it requires, different preparations.
Right.
But, you can use that.
Right.
For fireproofing, there are treatments for cotton and wool, which have their own natural, fire retardant capabilities, but they can be even safer if they're treated with other non-toxic retardants. There are other fibers like Kevlar and Nomex, which are made from fibers that are inherently fire resistant and can be used as a substitute in protective clothing. And then there are some specialized silica-based fabrics for high temperature applications, and they can be used as an alternative for fireproof materials. And then As far as food packaging is concerned, due to the concerns that have been raised, manufacturers are also looking at substances like beeswax and cellulose as a substitute. So, there are some substitutes out there. I think that the substitutes are now probably more cost effective than the PFAS and forever chemicals, just due to the very, very high regulatory standards.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. Well, if people don't know about this, they do now, and they're going to hear more about it, I predict.
They are, yeah.
Sounds
exactly.
like it. Well, thanks for joining us today, Craig. It's always so nice to talk to you.
Thank you, Rich.
Okay, and thank you for joining us here on Legally Speaking. We'll talk to you next time.